Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to our video in philosophy subjects. Before I start my explanation, I want to tell you about myself and my member. We are from first group, from philosophy group. For the first is me. My name is Nurmaisa. I am a student, a postgraduate student of Bengkulu University. And there are two members. For the first is Rismasari. She is an editor of this video, and she is also a student of postgraduate student of Bengkulu University. And the second one is Liza Anggraini. She is a narrator of this video, and then she is also a student of Bengkulu University. Before I start my explanation, today I would like to explain about the introduction of philosophy. Let me know you the parts of this explanation. There are 6 parts of this explanation. For the first is definition of philosophy. The second one is the definition of philosophy of science. The third one is the scope of philosophy of science. The fourth is the material objects and formal objects of philosophy of science. The fifth is philosophy of science problem. And the last is function and benefits of the philosophy of science. For the first one is the definition of philosophy. When we talk about the definition of philosophy, I want to explain to you. We can see the definition of philosophy in 2 parts. For the first is in language meaning. The second one is in meaning term. For the first is in language meaning. Philosophy is come from word philosophia. And philosophia is consists with 2 words. For the first is philos, which means lovers or friendship, and then the second one is sophia or sophie, which means wisdom. So that we can conclude in language meaning, philosophy is a lovers of wisdom, and then in meaning term is philosophy is attitude of person who loves wisdom, which encourage one mind to continuously advance, seeks satisfaction of the mind, doesn't feel himself as an expert, doesn't give in to laziness, continues to develop his reasoning to find the truth of something. That's it. That is a definition of philosophy. Next is the definition of philosophy of science. When we talk about the definition of philosophy of science, it's different with the definition of philosophy. To understand the meaning and the significance of the philosophy of science, here I want to give the definition of philosophy of science from several experts, which are summarized in a number of literature study of the philosophy of science. For the first one is from Robert Exelman. Philosophy of science is one aspect as a critic of current scientific opinions by comparison to present past views. But such a philosophy of science is clearly not a discipline autonomous of actual scientific practice. For the second one is from Lewis White Beck. Philosophy of science is a question and evaluate the method of scientific thinking and tries to determine the value and the significance of scientific enterprise as a whole. And the last one is from Cornelius Benjamin. The philosophic discipline, which is the systematic study, presumptions, and it is a place in the general scheme of the intellectual discipline. Okay, that is about the definition of philosophy of science. Okay, from the explanation by the definition by an expert, it can be concluded that the notion of the philosophy of science contain a basic conception which include the following. For the first is critical and evaluative attitude toward the scientific criteria, and then the second one is systematic attitude based on the scientific method, and the third is attitude of objective, ethical, and philosophical analysis on scientific basis, and the last is consistent attitude in building scientific theory and action. Okay, next, for the third is we talk about scope of philosophy of science. Okay, when we talk about the scope of philosophy of science, there are three scope of philosophy of science. For the first is ontological basis. For the first is epistemological foundation, and the last one is axiological basis. Okay, what is ontological basis? Okay, ontological basis is talk about the study about science itself, and then it is talk about the true nature of the object, and then it's also talk about the relationship between the object and the human perception that produce knowledge. It is the ontological basis. And then in epistemological foundation, it is talk about the process that enable the acquisition, the knowledge form of the science, and then it's talk about how this process, and then it is also talk about things must be observed in order to acquire the true knowledge, and then it's talk about the criteria of the knowledge, and then it's that about true, and also talk about the truth criteria, and then it's also talk about methods, techniques that help us in gaining the knowledge. And in axiological basis, it's talk about the knowledge form of the science used for. And then it's also talk about how is the relationship between the way of the use of the moral rules, and then how is the determination of the object under study based on the moral choice. How is the relation between procedural techniques and which are operationalization of the scientific method with the moral or professional norms. Okay, for the fourth is talk about material objects and formal objects in philosophy of science. When we talk about the material objects in a philosophy of science, it means that we talk about the knowledge, because the material objects in the philosophy of science is knowledge itself. And for the formal objects is approach used to gain the knowledge itself. Okay, and then for the fifth is the philosophy of science problems. In the philosophy of science problem, there are three problems in the philosophy of science problem. First is problem ontology of science. Problem ontology of science. Problem ontology of science is the development and the truth of science actually rests on an ontological basis. It's talk about what happens, and then the existence of the entity. Okay, the second problem is the epistemology. Okay, in the epistemology consists of about the discussion of the origin, nature, limitation, assumption, the basis of thinking, validity, reliability, and then the discussion, the question of the truth. And the last is the problem in axiology. Okay, in axiology, the problem like ethical implications, aesthetic aspects, exposure and interpretation of the rules, or benefit of science itself for human civilization. Okay, for the last one is about the function and benefit of philosophy. Okay, when we talk about the function, I strongly believe in all things that we do in this world have a function and have a benefit. For instance, when we learn about philosophy of science, I do believe a philosophy of science give a function and benefit for us. Okay, the function of the philosophy of science itself. For the first is as a tool to find the truth of all the existing phenomena in this world, such as when we learn about the philosophy of science, we can know how is rain happens, and then we can know the all phenomena it happens. And then for the second is defend and support and oppose or stand neutral against other philosophical view. And the third is provide an understanding of the way of life or outlook of life and world view. And the third is provide teachings on moral and ethics that are useful in life. Yeah, as we know that philosophy of science tell us how to be a good human, and is a very useful if we are in the social life. And the last function of the philosophy of science become a source of the inspiration and guidance for life in various aspects in life itself, such as economic, politics, law, and so on. Okay, so that the philosophy of science is not only give a function for the education, no, but it also give function in economic aspect, in politics aspect, in law, and in medical aspect, and so on. So it is very useful for us to learn the philosophy of science itself. And last is a benefit of philosophy. Okay, and the benefit of philosophy is not caught in the danger of intellectual arrogance. Okay, when we have a philosophy of science, we are not in danger of intellectual arrogance. And then the second is the critical of scientific activities. Yeah, when we learn about the philosophy of science, we can do the scientific activities because we have a mind about something. And the last is the reflect, test, and criticize the assumption and the method of the science continuously, so that the scientists keep the playing in the right corridor. Okay, I think that's all our explanation about introduction of philosophy. Thank you so much for your attention, and bye. See you again.